My name is Evelin Lyonette, and here we are in Sulpice in Switzerland on the 15th of September 2013. What I'd like to briefly talk about this morning is the economy as such, or economics as such, within the concept of sustainable development. Now, for many, many years, particularly under the influence of American economics, what people have taken as being proof of development, positive development, is the gross domestic product. Now, I mean, that is most definitely an economic measure. But does the economic measure cover everything that development should cover? And my contention is no, it doesn't. There are two areas which are either ignored or indeed, as I'll hope to point out, damaged by this preeminent emphasis on economic growth. The first one is the environment. We look around and we see so-called economic growth, but to achieve that purely economic growth, how much of the environment, natural resources, particularly water, forests, how much of that has been used up or damaged to achieve what we call positive development? And the environmental cost of development is only now coming into the calculations made by economists. Up to very recently, for economists, environmental costs were totally marginal. They didn't matter. You were achieving what you wanted to achieve. Now, I'll give you an example, a very broad one. A country I did a lot of work in was the Dominican Republic. Now, the World Bank, perhaps 20 years ago, but still in certain ways doing the same thing today, prescribed a program of structural adjustment, a macroeconomic program, which is today we tend to call globalization, whereby certain actions took place in the Dominican Republic in pursuit of increasing the gross domestic product. They did do. The GDP increased. But the environmental damage done by the World Bank's program was enormous. Good agricultural land became monoculture. And monoculture, as we all know, is susceptible to plant disease, and sure enough, that happened, which then reduced the economic return from the World Bank's program because of non-usability of the product. What I found most interesting was that the European Union, the European Commission in the Dominican Republic saw what was happening and while they didn't excuse me, they saw what was happening, And their program for a period of 5 years, hundreds of millions of euro, was devoted to repairing the damage done by the World Bank. Now, in net terms, this is basically a total loss. And it can't be called development. So let's look today. We have globalization, which essentially means giving over or even promoting the transfer to the private sector of whatever can be transferred. Now, sorry. Let me be very clear. I am in favor of a good, constant, robust use of private sector initiative. It has a huge role to play, but it is not total. And I think we're in danger of making the whole of economic development and economic growth dependent upon a private sector that really isn't equipped to do it. One has seen very unfortunate examples the last 10, 15 years where certain people have called for a regulation of the use of natural resources, or a regulation of private sector activity, whether it be banking or construction or oil industry, it doesn't matter. The industry responded by saying, no, we don't need that, please. We have a voluntary code of conduct and we will make sure things go right. Let's face it, they have not gone right. Some form of regulation, in other words, regulation in favor of the public, the people. Some form of regulation is needed. And there's got to be, you can't swing everything into the private sector, just the same as you can't expect governments to run businesses. There's got to be a meeting in the middle, which, if it meets in the middle, it becomes what I would call an integrated approach, putting emphasis on quality of achievement based on community and benefit to people. That is what development's about, not about economic growth. Economic growth may well be an instrument, a contributory instrument of achieving development. But development is benefit to people. And therefore, we shouldn't talk about, again, the World Bank particularly talks about price. I would like to put it this way. Price is value when traded. And what development is about is increasing that value so that the benefit accruing to people, both in terms of economics, in terms of quality of life, in terms of a reasonable and sustainable use of environment and natural resources, that is what development is all about. Thank goodness there are a number of groups, organizations, institutions which are beginning to think along these lines. I can tell you 20 years ago there were very, very few. Now there are more economists who are questioning the narrowness of their approach, or their classic mainstream approach. So I hope that these broadening concepts can be brought into real policy and social and political life, because they are the factors that, when they are reconciled and integrated, really bring development value to people. And here I've mentioned that there's a number of groups working on this. Personally, I find much of the work of the New Economics Foundation in London as being very helpful in moving this agenda forward, even though it's difficult and slow. And I hope that my own views, as I've given them to you now, may help you look towards that kind of direction and be ready to learn more. Thank you.